some of the football Strasbourg produced under Rosenior was spectacular. I mean, they were one of the best teams to watch in France, if not all of Europe.
The expectations on Liam Rosenior are going to be enormous immediately, and it'll be really interesting to see how he copes with that.
So joining me on the French Football Show this morning is the writer and broadcaster Tom Williams. Great to have you on board, Tom. Happy New Year. How's it going?
Hello, Matt. Bonne année, as they say. Yes, all good, thanks. Delighted to be back on the pod.
We've also got Andy Scott, the Ligue 1 commentator, who, much like a lot of Ligue 1 players at the moment, is in Morocco on Africa Cup of Nations duty. Andy, how are you getting on?
Hi Matt, Happy New Year, Salam Alaikum. I'm in Rabat. I'm in the sunshine. It's been very cold here the last 24 hours, but we've had an awful lot of rain since I came out here for the Africa Cup of Nations. So I'm just pleased that it's dry, and the real AFCON is about to begin with the quarterfinals in the next few days. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, exciting stuff, and I don't think you should complain about the weather, because here in Paris we are absolutely snowed in, unbelievable amounts of snowfall, and that is one of the excuses we've got as to why this podcast is a little bit late. So we do apologise if you've been waiting for the pod to drop, but it has now dropped, and we're going to start our new format, if you like, by discussing a big story, a story that has just broken this week, and it's creating a lot of heated discussion on both sides of the channel. So here we go. It is time for Le Dossier. Now, on Tuesday, Liam Rosenior confirmed that he is leaving Strasbourg to join Chelsea, or in other words, he is quitting his job in Ligue 1 in the middle of the season to join another club that is owned by Blueco, the so-called big brother of Strasbourg, Chelsea. So as you can imagine, Strasbourg fans are fuming. It raises big questions about the multi-club ownership model, and we will get into that discussion shortly. Chelsea fans are hopeful, but maybe a little bit underwhelmed as well. Rosenior is not a big name. He's only worked so far with Derby, Hull, and of course recently Strasbourg, and they don't know very much about him. But we, over here in France, we've followed Rosenior very closely. Over the last 18 months, we've seen how he works. He arrived here in Ligue 1 as a relative unknown, and he leaves after taking Racing into Europe for the first time in nearly 20 years, and having created, I think it's fair to say, a very positive dynamic within the squad with a very young group of players. So the first question I'm going to put to you, Tom, is if you're a Chelsea fan who hasn't watched Strasbourg, well, certainly not very much, what should you be excited or even worried about?
I think you should be excited about the fact that some of the football Strasbourg produced under Rosenior was spectacular. I mean, they were one of the best teams to watch in France, if not all of Europe at times last season. This really aggressive, energetic, hard-running, hard-pressing team, dominating possession, lots of positional fluidity, and pulled off some really impressive results. You look at Strasbourg's home form last season, they beat almost everyone. They beat Marseille, they beat PSG, they beat Lyon. And if Rosenior can get things to click in the same way at Chelsea, if he can get the same kind of buy-in from the players that he got at Strasbourg, and he was working with a very young squad at Strasbourg. I mean, the youngest squad in Europe's 5 major leagues. Chelsea got the youngest squad in the Premier League. He has shown that he's capable of producing very stylish, very effective, very exciting football with a young group of players. And he's going to be working with a similar kind of group at Chelsea. So if he can transfer that across, there could be a lot to be excited about.
Yeah, so I think the thing about Liam Rosenior is that, you know, he's young, he's up and coming, you know, he's 41 years old, and I think he's a really engaging character. I mean, the dealings that I've had with him, I mean, if you can call them dealings, I interviewed him recently after they played Crystal Palace in the Conference League game, the flash interview after that match, and he's always a really interesting guy to listen to when he talks about the game. Clearly a very intelligent character. He's got an interesting background in the game, but I think that it's a huge step for him. You know, I mean, there's no question that to go to Chelsea, recent history over the last couple of decades shows that it's a pretty thankless task for any manager, that if you don't deliver instant success, then the trigger might be pulled. And it's hard to see, honestly, Liam Rosenior making the jump to get the level of success that Chelsea demand immediately, because he's coming from a club where the expectations are completely different. I think he's done very well at Strasbourg over the last 18 months, but it can't be forgotten that recent form has been poor. I know there is context to that obviously the off-the-field situation is complicated, and it's all to do with the multi-club ownership model, the links with Chelsea, fans not happy with that and taking their anger out, going on strike at the stadium, meaning that the atmosphere there has been very weird, and Liam Rosenior has been outspoken about that. But the context is still, it can't be denied that recent results have been poor, that the team are not where they hoped they would be, and had it not been for this link between the two clubs, it's hard to imagine the Chelsea ownership looking at the job being done by Liam Rosenior at Strasbourg and deciding that he was the next man to manage them. Let's be honest. I think the pressure on him is going to be huge. I mean, Enzo Maresca did very well last season, and here we are 6 months later, he's been sacked. So that counts for nothing, what he did last season, winning the Club World Cup, winning the Conference League, taking the team back into the Champions League. They're not exactly in a bad position now, but he's been sacked. So, the expectations on Liam Rosenior are going to be enormous immediately, and it'll be really interesting to see how he copes with that.
I think, obviously there's going to be scepticism. There's going to be people saying, well, he's only got the job because of Blueco, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Personally, when he joined Strasbourg, I was pretty sceptical, and I thought, oof, just been sacked by a whole city. What does he know about French football? And I was so impressed so quickly. And I do think he will charm the media in the UK. I do think he'll get the Chelsea fans on side as well, because he's a great communicator. He's got charisma. He's a really, really bright guy. And I think if we look at the football side and what can Chelsea expect? You've talked about the fact that Strasbourg had the youngest team in Europe's top 5 leagues last year. And I think that's crucial to this whole thing. And I think Blueco want Chelsea giving more and more young players an opportunity and bringing them on. And that's part of the model, whether you like it or not. And he's been brilliant at that. And what struck me watching Rosenior is how he's very active. He's I don't know if you can compare him to Arteta, but he sort of micromanages during the games. And you can hear, like when I'm commentating matches, you hear in your headphones, he's constantly shouting, often to Diego Moreira, especially when he's on that left flank, who's a young sort of left wing back, and you just hear him going, Diego, go here, Diego, do that. And he likes to kind of basically like manage the team sort of, as the game evolves, and you'll see him switching his formation, switching tactics. Now, I think it is very different managing Diego Moreira to managing some of these young Chelsea players, whether that's Cole Palmer, who, is a young player, but is a superstar now. And, he's going to have to adapt to that. And I think that's the sort of question marks, but I do think he's bright and I think he's capable. But Tom, looking at the way he sets his teams up, I think what is interesting, he has flexibility, doesn't he? Like we've seen this season when Omega got injured, Panicelli was scoring loads of goals, and he tried different formations. He played the two of them together. You'll see him sometimes in games starting with a back 5 and even evolving during the game. He would have a player like Doucouré, who is superb at centre-half, but can step into the midfield as well. So can Chelsea fans sort of expect that? Or is he going to have to step in and sort of go, well, hang on, for the moment, I need to kind of adapt to Chelsea and try to play the Chelsea way for the moment and then see?
I mean, that's one of the big question marks. You suspect that he will want to come in and get the team playing a similar style of football to the football that Strasbourg produced. And I guess it will ultimately come down to how receptive the Chelsea players are to playing like that and how successfully he can get his message across. But, there are similarities between the football that Strasbourg played under Rosenior and the football that Chelsea were playing under Enzo Maresca. They're both teams that like to dominate possession. Rosenior invariably plays with a back 3, whereas Maresca plays with a back 4, but then very often Chelsea build up with a back 3 when they have possessions, but it's not that different. Out of possession, very aggressive, occasionally man-to-man marking, lots of pressing. So it's not going to be a huge shift for the Chelsea players. It's not like Thomas Frank coming in at Tottenham and having to completely recalibrate a team of players who'd been used to playing one kind of football under Ange Postecoglou. It should be evolution rather than revolution. And you look at the profile of some of those Chelsea players, particularly the younger players. They would appear to have the physical characteristics you need to play Rosenior style football, which is basically being young and super fit. I guess something we don't know is how malleable they're going to be tactically. You mentioned Diego Moreira, who has played everywhere at Strasbourg. Ismael Decore, again, sometimes plays centre mid, sometimes played at the back. Dylan Bakwan out at Nottingham Forest, was a wing back, was a winger, played on both sides. There hasn't been quite as much fluidity at Chelsea under Maresca, but nevertheless, we've seen Malo Gusto playing in central midfield. We've seen Reece James playing in central midfield. So there are examples of Chelsea players playing in these sort of hybrid roles. So I think there are reasons to think that this squad of players should be open to playing the kind of football Rosenior will probably want them to play, and it will come down to how successfully he can get his ideas across and get them on board with what he wants to do.
Andy, Enzo Fernandez, another example, World Cup winner. What's he thinking? Who's this bloke coming in? He managed Hull. He's going to have to win over that dressing room, and that's going to be the big challenge in the next days, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think about the example of Graham Potter. I mean, one can draw a link there. Now, Graham Potter's problem at Chelsea was perhaps a problem of legitimacy, which is kind of what you're getting at. This idea of a guy who we're not going to give him time. The players don't really know this guy. He went to Sweden and did well. Well, what does that matter when you're at Chelsea? And I think the same thing could apply here. You have all these, you've got a lot of young players, but you're right to mention Enzo Fernandez, one or two other big stars, probably thinking, well, this guy, he's managing at Strasbourg, who are they? The young players is one thing, the more experienced players is another thing. He's not had them at Strasbourg. The oldest players at Strasbourg by some distance are Ben Chilwell and Kalle Jonsson, the reserve goalkeeper. Everybody else is 23 or under. That's, there's nobody kind of in between.
Yeah, I think in some respects, if he doesn't do well, people will say, well, hang on, it's impossible to manage this club anyway because who's making the decisions or whatever. So, I mean, maybe it's not such a bad job to get, and maybe he will do really well. Rosenior's going to be taking on Charlton in the Cup in his first game, a club that he probably knows fairly well. The new Strasbourg manager, Gary O'Neill, that's been confirmed today on Wednesday. He's going to be taking Strasbourg to Avranches. I don't think Gary O'Neill can pronounce Avranches. I may be doing him a disservice, but I'm sure he doesn't know very much about them. Amateur club in French football, on a bit of a hiding to nothing there. We're going to talk about Strasbourg. They have appointed their new coach, but there's a lot of anger among the supporters about what has happened. One of the biggest fan groups, the Fédération des Supporters de Racing, put out a statement saying that Liam Rosenior's transfer marks yet another humiliating step in Racing's subjugation to Chelsea. And they are calling for the club president, Mark Keller, to resign. Just a bit of context, because Mark Keller's a very important figure in this whole discussion. He is a local man who played for Strasbourg. He was a good player, played for France as well in his career. And he helped to salvage Strasbourg when they were bankrupt in 2012 with a group of other businessmen, got together, bought the club, and it has helped them come up from the fifth tier back up to the top tier. He's also the man who in 2023 agreed to sell the club to Blueco and therefore sort of gave up control, if you like, to this American consortium. Now, we've seen protests on a weekly basis at the Stade de la Méno with the fans refusing to support the team, or some of them refusing to support the team in the first 15 minutes. There were protests when Emmanuel Emega, the captain, announced his move to Chelsea in the summer and posed with the Chelsea shirt on. So we can only imagine, Tom, what the reaction's going to be in the coming days with their coach, who was a popular coach and who has spoken out about the values of the club and about how they have to get behind this partnership with Chelsea. What's the reaction going to be among those fans?
I mean, they'll be furious, a lot of them, and I think rightly so. You look back at what Mark Keller has said about the Blueco structure in recent months. And he's often said that Strasbourg are not just a feeder club. This is a partnership. Chelsea are their big brother, but Strasbourg are, if not equal partners, then at least respected partners. And yet we have their talismanic centre forward and captain posing with another club's shirt after agreeing to join Chelsea. We now have Liam Rosenior being sort of winched out of Strasbourg mid-season in order to be parachuted in at Chelsea. It has basically become impossible for anyone at Strasbourg, and for Keller in particular, to argue that they are not a feeder club, because that is clearly the role that they now fulfil. As you mentioned, there has already been great opposition to Blueco ever since the takeover. The Ultras have been on strike at the beginning of matches. There have been Blueco out banners at the Menau, for at least the last couple of years. I think the danger with what's happened regarding Rosenior in particular is that some of the more moderate fans, the more casual fans, maybe they watch the odd game on the TV, they go to 2 or 3 games a season, who've been broadly supportive of Blueco, because there has been a division within the fan base, they might now start to see it in the same way that the Ultras do. What is happening to our club? How can we ever hope to achieve anything significant when we seem to serve purely as a breeding ground for future Chelsea players and future Chelsea coaches? But then I think another element that you have to take into consideration is that without Blueco's involvement, Strasbourg would not be doing as well as they are. It's a real sort of deal with the devil, and there will be supporters who are mindful of that. And it's extremely distasteful, if you care about football in any way, to see the way that Strasbourg have become subservient to Chelsea in this way. But at a time when, Ligue 1 clubs are on their knees financially, they are nevertheless able to go out and sign really exciting players, qualify for Europe, compete in Europe. So it is a really tricky one, but I suspect from the perspective of the supporters, it will only serve to increase the level of dissent towards Blueco and towards Keller in particular as the figurehead for the Strasbourg project.
If we look at the bigger picture though, Tom, is the reality not that French football has got itself in a mess financially with what happened during COVID and them deciding to stop the league prematurely, with the issues with television rights and the fact that a lot of the clubs are cash strapped and they've made themselves vulnerable to these investors. And we've seen Strasbourg, we've seen Nice, and we've seen Lyon becoming part of multi-club ownership models. And those 3 clubs have been the most chaotic this season. They've been in the most trouble. Lyon were relegated in the summer because of their financial problems. We know what's going on at Nice. It's a total mess. Is this a case though that French clubs and French football in general, they're sort of paying for mistakes that have been made structurally higher up, and the French league, which we know is bigger and much more important than leagues, with all due respect, in other countries like maybe Belgium or Switzerland or Portugal, financially, that's where it's at, and that's the problem.
I mean, if you judge things from a purely sporting perspective, Blueco's ownership of Strasbourg has been a success. Strasbourg, during the Blueco era, have become one of the best teams in France. We're not seeing that so much at the moment, but they're still in contention for European qualification. They finished 7th last season, got into Europe for the first time since 1981. But had they not lost their last 2 games of the season against Angers and Le Havre, 2 teams who they usually beat with their eyes closed, if they'd won those 2 games, they would have been in the Champions League, which would have been a remarkable achievement. I think that the problem for French football is that, taken as a whole, multi-club ownership has just been spectacularly controversial. For all that Strasbourg have achieved, the fans are up in arms and calling for the head of the president and want Blueco out. The Eagle Group's management of Lyon was a complete disaster. Ineos's management of Nice is heading in a similar direction. Club ownership has not been transformational for Troyes. Red Star fans hate the fact that they're owned by 777 partners, but French clubs have to find money from somewhere. You've got historic clubs like Le Havre, like Angers, who cannot spend any money, literally have no money to spend on transfers and having to bring in loan signings or free transfers. That doesn't feel endlessly sustainable. There may be a way of making multi-club ownership work in France. And I think, French clubs are so cash-strapped at the moment that they have to be open to the idea of becoming a part of a multi-club model. I think the difficulty is when you get to these sort of pressure points, as we're witnessing now with Strasbourg, and how do you manage that? How do you make it clear that the French club is not just the feeder club? I don't think you can say that multi-club ownership has failed in France, because it's one thing that is keeping certain clubs' heads above the water. But we can't say either that it's been a success, because you just list the most high-profile examples, and they're generally all seen as really bad examples of multi-club ownership. So I don't think we should rule it out completely as a viable form of club management. But in its current format, Strasbourg aside, it isn't really working for anyone.
Okay, well, we're going to have to move on and maybe talk a bit about Gary O'Neill, see how he gets on at Avranches, and we'll talk a bit about him next week. But I just to touch on what you were saying, because I always want to get the last word in. I think what is interesting as well is that Chelsea and Bluco haven't said anything to to Strasbourg, who was supposed to be their little brother. And I think in these multi-club models, the owners haven't really helped themselves with their communication. I mean, Sir Jim Ratcliffe's perhaps the best example by saying, I don't watch Nice because the level's not good enough. I find it boring. I mean, maybe he's trying to drag Manchester United. Maybe he's not wrong. Well, they are now, yeah, but Andy, stop it. And, likewise, a little word from Bluco to say, this isn't ideal. We do apologise to Strasbourg, but we are very committed to you. And this, that would have been helpful. But this was our first sort of in-depth topic, in-depth chat. Le dossier, as I've decided to call it. We're going to have a dossier each week. So let us know what you thought, if you found that interesting, if you think it's horrible and we need to just stop it immediately, let us know. League1podcast@gmail.com is still our email address. And also some suggestions for topics that you'd like to hear discussed, maybe a little bit more than just in a quick 5-minute discussion.